טוב, שלום, שלום לכולם ולכולן, וברוכים הבאים לבימת הרקטור לאחר שנה של הפסקה. כן, שנה שלא קיימנו את הבימה מכיוון שעם כל מה שקרה בשנה שעברה, כן, לא היה, אני חושב שלא היה מספיק פס רוחב לאף אחד, כן, גם לדברים האלה, אבל מי שעוקב יודע שלקראת סוף השנה ביום הסטודנט, כן, ארגנו את יום הקהילה האקדמית, וזה היה יום שלם של בימת הרקטור, אבל בהרבה יותר מורחב וגדול, והכוונה היא לקיים את זה שוב השנה, אז כבר תרשמו ביומנים, יום הסטודנט, אני לא יודע מה, אני לא זוכר את התאריך של יום הסטודנט, כן, אבל יום הסטודנט יהיה לא רק יום חג סטודנטיאלי, אלא גם יום חג של חברות וחברי הסגל. אנחנו נתכנס ליום מלא פעילות, ואני מקווה שזה יתווסף לרעיון של המפגשים האלה, שאני ממשיך בהם למרות כי אני תמיד אומר שעדיף איכות על כמות, כן? ואני מאוד שמח על מי שמצליח לפנות מזמנו ולהגיע, זה באמת הזדמנות לשמוע, כן, אני רואה שיש כאן הרבה אנשים מהמחלקה לפוליטיקה וממשל, אבל גם ממקומות אחרים באוניברסיטה, להכיר קודם כל אנשים לא מהתחום ולא מדלת האמות, מצד אחד, מצד שני, לשמוע דברים מעניינים ולחשוב ולהעלות כל מיני רעיונות, וגם לאכול. אני חושב שאוכל הוא מרכיב מאוד מאוד חשוב בחיים האקדמיים ובכלל. אז בסוף, כן, לאחר הדיון, בחוץ יהיה אוכל, ואפשר יהיה להמשיך ולהכיר אנשים חדשים ולדבר, והפריה הדדית, ואז להמשיך עם יומנו. אז, במפגש הראשון של בימת הרקטור היום, אני מאוד 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 שמח לארח, שאנחנו מארחים, או לא מארחים בעצם, היא בת בית, את פרופסור ג'ניפר אושר, ג'ני, מהמחלקה לפוליטיקה וממשל בפקולטה למדעי הרוח והחברה. ג'ניפר, קודמה ממש לא מזמן, לפרופסור מן המניין, כן? ואני לא אתן את אני מדבר כל ההישגים שלה, אבל כן, היא בוגרת של האוניברסיטה העברית, מבחינת הדוקטורט, הייתה בהרווארד תקופה מסוימת ובפנסילבניה, כן, שתי אוניברסיטאות שהיום, כן, או שהיו, כן, במוקד העניינים בתגובה שלהן למה שקרה ב7 באוקטובר. המחקר שלה עוסק ביחסים בין, או בעצם היא תדבר על המחקר שלה, וזה הכי טוב שאני לא אקלקל, אני אתן לה לדבר על המחקר שלה, וההישג באמת מרשים, ודוגמה ומופת, כן, לא ציפייה זה לא מילה נכונה, אבל לאן שאנחנו רוצים שחוקרות והחוקרים שלנו ישאפו להגיע, והיום זה באמת מדד למצוינות, זה ה-ERC, כן, ה-European Research Council Starting Grant, וכן, ג'ניפר באמת זכתה ב-ERC, והיום אני חושב שהיא תדבר קצת על הפרויקט של ה-ERC, כן, שנקרא Participation and Representation in the Digital Age, אבל גם קצת מעבר, אני חושב, נכון, על התהליכים ועל דברים שקשורים להגשה, ואני רק אומר יצא לי, כן, ללוות את ג'ניפר בשלבים הראשונים של ההגשה, כמובן היא עשתה את הכל בזכות עצמה, כן, ולא אין לי שום חלק ויד או רגל בזה, אבל ראיתי עד כמה, ואני יודע מעצמי כמי שהיה מעורב בשני ERCים, עד כמה התהליך הזה הוא תהליך מורכב, אבל גם מאוד 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 מעשיר. וגם אם הוא לא צולח, הוא יכול להביא להרבה מאוד כיוונים חדשים ורעיונות על מחקריים ואיך לקדם את המחקר, אז זה תהליך שכדאי מי שיכול ורוצה, כן, כדאי מאוד שיעשה. אז אני דיברתי מספיק, ניתן לג'ניפר את הבמה, שוב תודה שהסכמת לתת את ההרצאה הראשונה של בימת הרקטור, לאחר ההרצאה שאלות, תשובות, וכמו שאמרתי, אוכל. לצערי לא אלכוהול, אבל אוכל כן. אז בבקשה, ג'ני. וג'ני תדבר באנגלית.
תודה רבה חיים. אני דווקא אתחיל בכמה מילים בעברית, אז אני אעבור לאנגלית. רציתי קודם כל להתחיל עם תודות, תודות למחלקה וגם לפקולטה, ועם סיפור קטן על התודות. הפעם הראשונה שהשתתפתי בישיבת מחלקה אחרי קידום של מישהו, ומי שקודם הביא את הכיבוד לכולם, וכאמריקאית חשבתי שזה נורא מוזר. רגע, אמורים לחגוג את האדם, לא שהם מביאים את האוכל לאחרים, אז דאגתי, כאילו אולי איכות הכיבוד ישפיע על הקידום ההבאה, זה פשוט הרגיש קצת מוזר. ואני רואה עכשיו, כשעשינו את החגיגה במחלקה לפני כשבוע, אני מאוד אוהבת את המסורת הזה עכשיו. אני חושבת שעכשיו רואים בפרספקטיבה הזאת עד כמה הקידום של כל אדם ובכל שלב בעולם האקדמי או כסגל או באופן כללי דורש את התמיכה של כל מי שנמצא סביב. אז קבענו את התאריך הזה לפני שידענו על הטיימינג של הקידום, אבל לי זה הרגיש קצת כמו אפשרות, אני לא הבאתי את הכיוון היום, אבל להביא את ההרצאה זה גם סוג של תודות לקהילה הזאת. וגם זה כבוד גדול הסמסטר להעביר את ההרצאת בבימת הרקטור הראשונה, אחרי ששנה שעברה שלא הייתה, ואני מאוד מזדהה עם הכוונה של חיים לבנות את הפקולטה וגם אוניברסיטה, שאנשים מחוברים אחד לשני, למרות זאת שאנחנו בדיסציפלינות שונות וגם תפקידים שונים. אז רציתי להתחיל קצת שאנחנו נדע מי נמצא פה. אני מכירה הרבה פנים אבל לא כולם, אז רציתי לבקש, אני חוקרת מדעי החברה, אני עושה סקרים, אז נתחיל עם קצת סקר קולני שנדע מי נמצא כאן. אז נעשה את זה בצורה אירופאית של הדפיקה על השולחן. אז מי מפה חברי סגל? מי עובדי מנהל? מי סטודנטים? ומי סטודנט לתואר ראשון? אז יש לנו את הגיוון של מי שנמצא פה. גם מבחינת דיסציפלינות, מי מדעי הרוח והחברה? בגאווה. מי מטבע או מפקולטות אחרות? יופי, מוזמנים. ומי, רציתי לשאול, מי שמע עד היום על מה זה ERC ולא רוצים לשמוע עוד? מי לא יודע בדיוק מה זה וירצה לשמוע קצת מבוא? אוקיי, לא להתבייש, אני אוכל להגיד משפט או שניים. בסדר, אז עם הרקע הזה אני אעבור לאנגלית ואני אתחיל בצורה לא מסורתית להרצאה כזאת. אני רוצה לספר לכם קצת על הסיפור האישי שלי, הנרטיב שהביא אותי לחקור את הנושאים בלב המחקר של ה-ERC. ועוד משפט או שניים בעברית, חלק מהסיבה שרציתי לעשות את זה בבימה הזאת, זה כשהתחלתי את העבודה שלי כאשת סגל בפוליטיקה וממשל, שמעתי בפעם הראשונה, אני חושבת שזה היה באוריינטציה לכוח אדם באוניברסיטה, מישהו אמר וואו את עוף מוזר, ולא ידעתי כאילו מה זה אומר, I had to look it up, מה זה לדבר עם אנשים, מה זה בדיוק, מה הכוונה, לא זוכרת מי זה היה, יכול להיות שהם כבר לא פה, אבל הכוונה זה אוקיי, כיסוי ראש, רואים שאת דתייה, חייב להיות שיש נטייה ימין, אבל את חברת סגל בפוליטיקה וממשל, כאילו מה קורה פה? וזה לא היה פעם ראשונה ששמעתי את המונח הזה גם מקולגים וגם במקומות אחרים. אז קצת להציג מהיכן הגיע העוף המוזר, אני אעבור לאנגלית. And if anything isn't clear, you're welcome to let me know. So you can hear from my accent in Hebrew and also in English that I'm from the United States, from the US. And I come from a Navy family. My dad was in the Navy, my mom was a nurse. And usually the next thing people ask me is, so he was a Rev. And my dad wasn't a rabbi in the Navy. He was he's retired now, but then he was a captain of nuclear submarines, קצין של צוללות גרעיניות. And so what that meant, and my parents have a great story. They met in the 4th grade in Silver Spring, Maryland, where all the conservative Jews lived at the time. And they fell in love then, and they've been together since then in a conservative American family, right? So what that meant for those who know US, you know, the Navy, the culture, you end up moving around a lot. I have 3 siblings, and we were all born in different states, Hawaii, Connecticut, New York, and Maryland. I have a feeling of my interest in comparative politics, which is what I study now. Not knowing it then, but coming from those experiences of moving around a lot as a kid. Those who also know American and Navy culture know that kids in Navy families are often called Navy brats, have behavioral problems. And, you know, that may also be true. But my experience in one of these big moves, I think, points to some of the ways in which kids who move around can cause trouble. Our biggest move in my experience was when I was 12 years old. We moved from Connecticut, which in the US is sort of like one of the richest states and the best education in the country, to South Carolina, Charleston, South Carolina, which is among the worst. And just total shock at 12 years old to see how moving from one place to another can lead to an entirely different set of opportunities, of lifestyle, of values, and your sense of your future. You know, luckily we're a Navy family pulled together, had resources to make things work even there. And I always loved school, a nerd no matter where we were. And it was an honor to, and exciting to apply to colleges and get into a place like Harvard. And that's where I went for my undergraduate degree. And I went as pre-med, wanting to study medicine. My mom was a nurse. I wanted to do like her just a little bit more. And I loved these science classes, but I was just in total culture shock my entire first year. The elite nature of the campus, there weren't many Navy families in my immediate surrounding. And the bigger shock for me, connected to my field in comparative politics, I had never lived in a big city. When you live in Navy towns, they're like peripheral towns where people are working class, but you don't really sense poverty. And moving to Boston, and specifically to Cambridge, Massachusetts, Harvard Square, you'll see homeless people and rich Harvard kids side by side, just not really even seeing each other, right? Just going past each other. And so I ended up becoming interested enough in that, what is that all about, that I switched from my science studies. I started to take classes in social sciences. I ended up majoring in something similar to PACAM here, social studies. And during that time, I was looking for a student job, and someone recommended, there's a job opening on a certain project. So I went to be a research assistant for a project for someone named Theda Skocpol, who those of you in the social sciences may know the name. She's an important researcher in the 20th century, 21st century social sciences, and was the first tenured woman at Harvard in these types of fields. I didn't know that at the time. I started working on the project, and the project was about civic engagement in America and how it had changed over time. The project was very much in dialogue with the work of Robert Putnam and Bowling Alone that some may hear of sort of the unraveling of civil society in America. And I loved working on the project. It was such interesting work. I loved the archival work. I loved the research. And I ended up as a BA student being kind of recruited by Theda to run her graduate student team of the Talmidei Merkal as a BA student. And it was confusing. There were people from divinity school, from economics, from education, from political science. And I didn't understand why they were the most miserable people I had ever met in my life. These graduate students at Harvard who all they saw was downward mobility in their academic career. And so I loved the research, but I would never want to be an academic. So that was my decision at the time. And I went on after my BA. This isn't so clear from my CV. I worked as a full-time political and community organizer for 7 years after I finished my BA and before my MA. And so I did that work in the US for 3 or 4 years, and then in Israel for 3 or 4 years, up until the time that we had our first kid. We now have 3. And I was asking around, is there any way to earn a little bit more working in these amutot, these organizations? And people said, yeah, just go get an MA. So that's what brought me back to doing an MA in public policy at Hebrew University, as most of our students do MAs as like a side job to the main thing. I see, people nodding. And somehow looking at these topics from a comparative perspective, something about the connectedness of the Israeli community academically, that people seem to still manage to have full lives and families, et cetera, and still be academics, made me say, okay, I'll do a PhD. And even at the time that I went out began to consider and then went out on my postdoc, I was not at all planning to continue on an academic path. I was planning to then continue back to community and political organizing. And somehow just the research itself, and then also 2 key choice points, 2 key conversations of connections with colleagues led me to be sort of here today and not on another path. So I'll mention them briefly, but I could tell a longer story about that. Then I'll shift into the research. The first is our department, Politics and Government. Gal Arieli, as part of the department, reached out to me when I was as a postdoc, when I still really wasn't planning to engage with an academic job and career, and said, we have an opening here. It was soon after Parashat HaMalag. There's something to contribute to. And I had to think carefully, am I really serious about this to go on a job talk? I said, yeah, let's give this a try. And it was a magical visit. And I still have pictures at home on our wall from that visit of seeing that can be a combination here of I think a really special, unique combination in many ways of high-level university research at an institution that has a very strong commitment to the community and strong commitment to the students. That's true for BGU in general, and I'd say with some pride, that's true all the more so for politics and government. We can do Knox, yes. And so that is part of what led me to sort of give a try to tenure track period. And the second and final note that I want to say on this narrative story of bringing me to this project was around the time of tenure transition. I had an important conversation with Chaim, who encouraged me to look into the ERC, which is a grant project that lasts for about 5 years. For those who are at the early stage, which is 7 years after finishing your PhD. It can be longer if you have kids, so I took advantage of that. You get a year and a half extra for each kid. A research project that involves you receiving a budget of 1.5 million euro, of the university receiving a matching budget of 1.5 million euro, and being able to hire a team of researchers who can then work on a project where you're almost kind of running a mini institute, in the university. Now, I did not want that. But the administrative side of things, but I was collaborating with people who had ERC projects, and I saw some of the benefits and also some of the pain, for those of us who know the grant scheme well, that can come along with it. And importantly, as I was doing sort of the service work of researching what is this ERC and getting the information for the faculty, I began to learn that it is really transforming for better and for worse, I think, both together, higher education in Israel and in Europe in terms of expectations and incentives, in terms of applying and budgets and these sorts of things. But the point for wrapping up this narrative for today is I now, having launched the ERC project a year and a half ago, if you asked me at an earlier stage if I would want to do it again, I would say absolutely no way. There's a lot of administrative startup and challenges. And I'm just now getting to the stage where I'm really enjoying it. And I do see, what Chaim was describing in terms of the capacity, and I'll introduce a few slides into the research some of our team members who are here. And it's exciting to be able to be a part of that. So that's a bit of the narrative background to, let's see if I can advance one slide, to the topics. So first, that was note of appreciation. That'll be our longest section. The other key items that I'll touch on briefly here, and then we'll get to food and mingling, is I'll do an ERC project overview that'll include, sort of an on one foot description of a few of the first papers of the project. I'll present one work in progress in a kind of interactive way, and then I'll conclude with invitations to some upcoming ERC project events. So first, ERC project overview. Those of you who are on laptops or want to check this out later on, this is the link to the website of the project. We worked hard on it. We're really excited about it. The picture here, I'll introduce her properly in a moment, is from Dr. Aya Shashan. Her pictures are throughout the website from fieldwork she had done in Spain. But for those who think, I want to know what an application looks like, I want to really learn what this project is about, you can click on the orange project summary document circle. And if you open it up, it has a edited version of what they call in ERC applications the B2, which is your full application. So it's about a 12 or 13 page edited document, and you can see what an application text kind of looks like, and it also gives an overview of the project. And for those of you who might want to follow along with the slides for today, you can go to the same URL and to the news section, and then in the first slide, I have links here to some of the papers. If you click on the slides, you'll get to the same slideshow that I'm presenting now in a Google Comments form. And you can make comments, and I'll be happy to receive them. Okay, so intellectually, theoretically, what is this project about? So bringing you into the world of the motivating puzzle of the project. What these images here represent are trends in political participation and representation, primarily participation, over the past several decades worldwide. And so what we see in the left circle, the best, most comprehensive research on trends in voting show that over several decades, it has been declining somewhat. In some places, maybe it's stable. Some places it may go up a little bit. But when you do the most robust and comprehensive test of what's happening with voting, it's declining and certainly not increasing. During these same 5 decades or so, there's an opposite trend in every other type of political participation, the picture on the right. And so this includes types of participation that were common many decades ago and back to ancient Greece of protesting, of contacting leaders, et cetera, that there's a steady increase over time in how common the percentage of the population that's engaging in these types of participation. And also there's an increasing number of the kinds and ways in which people can be politically active. So all of the category of digital participation is the easiest example, but we also have examples of, for example, political consumerism, the way that people use, the way they buy or don't buy things in a politically strategic way. So we know that these trends exist, right? But the question of what does that mean for representation, for the way in which we as citizens are represented by decisions that get made at the governmental level and by policy changes at the governmental level is not so clear. One main piece of the puzzle that I focused on in the application and some of the works is that voting tends to be, it's done by a lot of people in the percentage of the population. It's the most prevalent political act still, even with the other ones becoming more common. And if you look at the economic background, the educational background of the average voter, so it's an average background of the population, whereas every other type of non-electoral participation, whether it's protest and certainly digital participation, tends to be done by those who have more income and education resources, right? So if we think about political participation as citizens sending a message to decision makers of various kinds, whether it's directly to government decision makers, whether it's to those in charge of policy change, and we see this shift in patterns. So it seems really possible that what happens is that it's kind of like a megaphone for the voice of people who have more resources to begin with, to be more influential in communicating those representational and policy preferences to people who are in charge. So that's the kind of motivating why we might want to study it. Now, when I wrote about this puzzle in my MA Hatzat Mechkel thesis, I was like, well, surely someone has already written about this. Like, what is political science for if it's not figuring out, does participation matter at all, right? But it turns out in terms of research design, in terms of taking data that you can gather and analyze on the ways in which people participate, and then very clearly and robustly matching that to whether or not they are represented, developments in both data and methods to be able to do that well have only come together in recent years. And so that's part of what I did in the ERC project theoretical framework, was sort of put together a few different lines of work that get at different aspects of that puzzle. So the first one on the left, repertoires of participation. People who study political participation often study one political act at a time. Someone's an expert in voting and someone else is an expert in protest, right? But as someone who had spent 7 years as a community and political organizer, it was really clear to me that they should be studied together, that people who vote are likely also people who protest, and that this increase in different kinds of non-electoral participation is likely raising the voices of those who are already active. So repertoires means studying those things together. The middle, subjective representation, is saying not only whether or not people's preferences are translated into policy, but whether people feel that they're being represented, which is a real question in public debate. And then finally, the final piece that I think sort of shifts this from a regular research project to more of an ERC ambition type project for this particular approach is, I know from the literature, I expect that what I would find is what people have found in previous work is that repertoires of participation are unequal, subjective representation is unequal, and then you publish the paper and you move on to the next paper. That's sort of how political science works, or academic careers in general. But part of the motivating story that I told you all, a piece of at the beginning, connects to sort of a values interest where I'm coming from, of wanting to study carefully what are ways to be able to mobilize and organize people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds to be able to have them effectively bring their voice into the public sphere. And so that third part of the work is officially supposed to start in year 3. We've already started some of it, includes more experimental work of people working out in the field with different types of organizations. So that's a taste of the theoretical framework. I'll skip over research design, happy to talk about it more. I'll note briefly this question of how to then translate, 1.5 million euro minus 20% for overhead for a lot of important things, translate into actually recruiting relevant researchers to my field to be able to work with them. It felt impossible to me at the time. So I really took things step by step and said, okay, I'll apply, but I'm not going to win, and I'll just save them, give the information to Chaim, and someone else will have to deal with it. But even once winning the grant, the intimidation of how to recruit people and then how to have it be a good fit and match for BGU was a really big question. In terms of timing, it was luckily in some ways good timing of being soon it was sort of the tail end of COVID. So people knew that we could work remotely, that it is an option. And people hadn't yet shut down being able to set up that kind of work as work that is good and meaningful. So what I decided to do was just give it a try. No one would give me an answer. Is it okay for me to put out a call for applicants that allows people to work remotely? And I said, all right, well, what's the worst that can happen? We had this thing in our family. They're going to put me in ERC jail. Okay, so then I'll take the Kol Koreh back and start over again. But what ended up happening is people got excited about that idea that could be not only like a COVID era setup, but that people who have to stay in a certain country because that's where their family are, or people who are really interested in the project but can't come to Israel, can apply. So we ended up having 70 people apply. Only about 5 of them were totally irrelevant. A really good quality group of people that it was a pleasure to meet and learn from their work. And here is the core team of the project. On the top left is the anchor of the project. She's not here yet, but she's on another, oh, there she is. Raya Evan David, who's the administrative manager of the project. Also together with, who's sitting right next to her, Iris Edelson-Schein, who is paved the way for every researcher at BGU in humanities and social sciences, hand in hand with Raya. And I'll say here also, as I'm introducing the core team and the broader team, also hand in hand with Yasmin and with Lilach at the Reshut, who we had a bumpy start. I didn't know how to handle the budget. I was like, wait a minute, where does that part go? Where does that part go? I have yet to encounter harder working colleagues who are really dedicated to ethical work and collaborative work, and I get a little bit clamped. The teamwork on the administrative side is something that many people don't pay attention to in thinking about starting the projects, but without it, it's really not possible. So Raya is the only picture here, but we know there's a broader core team that's there. I'll briefly note, we have other researchers, our postdoc researcher from Sweden, who's physically in Sweden, and we have Dr. Aya Shushan, who's here, who finished her PhD in our department under supervision from Dani and Niamh Gordon, and is leading amazing work that we'll get a little taste of as I continue to the next stage. We have a researcher in Germany, Francisca Castro, a researcher in Italy, who works on the repertoire methodological work, the latent class analysis work. And we have a researcher at Tel Aviv University, Rector, who's an advisee of Yotam Margalit. So we've managed to kind of cobble together these really amazing researchers who each one of them have a certain line of work. And that I'll get to in a moment to wrap up here. And this is a bit of a taste also of the extended team of the project. So we have also from our faculty, not from our faculty, from computer science land, Dr. Nir Greenberg here at Ben Gurion is one of the senior researchers of the project as well. So now what I'm going to do, I think as my opening narrative maybe bit into some of our kibud time toward the end, what I'm going to do is really give you a very quick on one foot of each of these papers. Those of you who are interested to check them out, you can check out this website. All of the links are here, and I'm really happy to talk about them more for any who are interested. This is a paper from the annual review of political science. We know we have one for each of the fields that's intended to be, among the best research that on a certain topic. And this paper focuses on organizing and democracy. And the gorgeous picture here in the middle developed when one of the co-authors with me knew someone in the natural sciences who did literature mapping. And they said, why don't we just do a literature map? And we're like, what the heck is that? And so apparently it's very common among people in natural sciences, but social science people don't do it much. I'm curious, how many people have seen a literature map before or know what VOS viewer is? Okay, so we've got like 3, 4. And so we learned from scratch. And at the time, Aya Shoshan was a research assistant on the project. And we built out such a large and detailed appendix of how to create this one figure in that article that our co-authors of the article were like, just spin it out to a different paper. They were like, it's too long for this article. And so that's what we did. So the next paper here, paper number 2, Aya is the first author. This paper is in press, and it's a fairly brief, a 4,000-word methodological piece on how to do literature mapping, which I and we are really excited about, and I is starting a whole empire on how to do this in different ways. The paper 3, this is more for those among us, maybe some of the natural sciences, those who are more quantitative oriented. The work that I mentioned on repertoires, on how individuals combine a number of different indicators of participation, I had no idea when I first started doing that work that it's fairly methodologically complex. Instead of only studying vote or only studying protest, if you want to see how one individual combines several indicators and patterns, so there is research on it, but there isn't or wasn't until Johan on our team has been leading it. What's the word? Easy to use software that allows you to be able to make those analyses. And so we have some technical work here on a technique called latent class analysis, an R package that has been downloaded over 9,000 times. This is like a statistical software package since we put it up about a year ago. So people are really using it, and we're able to then apply it in different work. I'll note here briefly, one of the aspects of the project that was in the application, but I never felt was realistic and knew how to go about it, was taking a lot of different surveys and combining them into one single harmonized data set. And my concerns were founded as I talked with different teams who had tried to do that work before. They ended up spending the entire 5 years harmonizing variables into a data set, but then not sort of producing new research. So I took that as a cautionary tale, but I also took it as, let's document this for other people so that there aren't more ARC applications where people are saying to do the same sort of a thing. So we have accepted at one of the journals in political science, PS, a co-edited symposium on data harmonization, where we have 13 articles that colleagues have given us, a title and abstract for, and now we'll have to work with them and actually do our own articles as well. But the idea is to share as a public good what I and others have learned about the advantages and pitfalls of data harmonization. And the last one here is one that I just finished up some writing on it most recently, and my heart is there at the moment. I think maybe Aya's as well. Is this a spin-off of the ERC project of meanings of protest? So I was meant to go into the field to do interviews on October 8th last year on a project that was meant to re-interview people from her dissertation from 10 years ago on political efficacy in Israel and in Spain. Not the easiest timing to launch that particular project. So on the one hand, it allowed this very interesting literature mapping work to develop. And on the other hand, so we've thought about how to pivot and still engage with the main ideas of doing that interview field work. And we've done it in collaboration with a colleague in Vienna. Her name is Carolina Plesia, who has an ERC herself on the meanings of voting. And so I went to a book project, a book workshop in Vienna. And during the workshop, the idea came up, wait a minute, there should be a whole nother project on the meanings of protest. Given the trends that I talked about at the beginning of the talk, it's even more important, perhaps, to understand how citizens understand protest over time. So that's sort of another piece going. I list here other papers in progress that I'm happy to talk about. One I note here with Nir Greenberg at BGU on political influencers on social media that we're excited about. So that's it for the project overview. For the work in progress, I'm going to really just give everyone a very brief interactive taste of it. And so here, what I'm going to do is I have some green sheets, and I'm going to pass them out and ask everyone to take a pen and answer a question that I'll ask. And Chaim will be my lovely assistant. Okay, so as he's passing it out, I'll give you background on the paper. So this paper really asks the big, hairy question that no one has wanted to touch in political science. Are the politically active better represented? So you'll see here the picture of one of the postdoc team members. This is Jesper Lindqvist, who we've worked very hard on the bilateral contract, and we continue to, and for good reason. His advisors in Sweden created a new data set on representation, right? Even as I was applying for the ERC, I had no idea how best or how precisely to measure representation. It's not something that's measured well in the literature. What they did, two of these co-authors on the paper, the last two, Mikael Persson and Anders Sandell, they did something brilliant, which is imagine that everyone in this room, that we're all respondents on a survey where someone called us and said, what's your policy preference on XYZ policy today, right? And do you vote and do you protest and are you active in other ways? And ask a whole bunch of other questions, right? So there are all kinds of surveys like that out there. What they did is they took that survey data and they had a huge team of coders and they said, let's code 5-year lag what actually happens in that country on that specific policy. So if people asked us in this room, what's your preference about the environment today? And then their team coded what happened with policy 5 years from now. It's a way to be able to measure whether people who participate more end up having their preferences better represented at a later time. Now, this is the in-class exercise. So there's a debate in the literature whether people who vote and participate in different ways would be better represented. So what I'd like is everyone to borrow a pen if you don't have one. And the first question is, who do you think, if we were in that kind of a group, being interviewed today about a whole range of policies, not just environment, but any policy that any survey would ever ask about, who do you think would be better represented? Voters or non-voters? So I just make it more specific here. Write down A for question 1 if you think voters are better represented, B if you think it's non-voters, and C, no difference. So everyone go ahead and write down an answer, even the political scientists among us. You have to commit, it's on the paper. Check your neighbors, everyone's got it? Okay, and then the next question, who do you think is better represented protesters or non-protesters. So again, think of ourselves in this survey group. You said whether you protested at some point in the past year. 5 years from now, who do you think is going to be represented? And again, I put A, B, and C. Protesters are better represented, non-protesters are no difference. I'm not going to go over the theory and the ideas of why one may be better than the other, but I want to be really clear, there are really good theoretical reasons why all of these answers could be explained in decades of literature. Okay, everyone have their answer written down? Okay, I want you to turn to the person next to you, and we're going to take 2 minutes and compare your answers. And if your answers are, and explain them. If your answers are different, try to convince the other person. I am setting my timer. Go. Yeah.
Are non-voters disenfranchised, or they have the right to vote and they choose not to?
Oh, good question. Non-voters are people who have the right to vote, but choose not to. Thanks for listening. All right, I interrupted the flow. I'll stick with the interruption. Okay, so let's come back. And I'll again do a brief survey of the room in the European knocking style. So for question 1, go ahead and knock if you wrote yourself, not your partner, that you think voters are better represented. Okay. Knock if you think B, non-voters. And those who say no difference. Okay. All right, question 2. Who thinks protesters are better represented? Okay. Non-protesters? Okay. A little louder, yeah. And no difference? Okay. You guys really thought about it. There's real variance here. Everyone just didn't pick A, right? Okay, great. So for our purposes today, I'm going to completely skip over all of the data and all of the findings. I'm going to bring you to the conclusion slide. I'll invite you to other talks if you want to come to them, and I'll go over more of the details of how the findings were produced. This paper is now a full draft and it's under review. We think that we've come to the findings that we believe in and think are correct. We'll have to do a lot of dances with reviewers, as people often do, until it's actually published. But we feel pretty confident in the findings. So I'm here just sort of skimming over for you the slides if you want to check them out more. This is a literature slide. Research questions. Here is a whole slide on data and methods. I will say in terms of contribution, this is, to our knowledge, the first study, this is a quote from the paper, that analyzes cross-national data connecting opinions to subsequent policy implementation on multiple policy issues to assess whether those who are politically active have better opinion policy congruence. That means that your opinions are better represented in policy compared to non-participators, whether they're voters or demonstrators. So skipping all over the tables with the stars, we get to the answers. So the answer is the participation policy connection, is it higher for people who are politically active? And the answer from the data is yes for protesters, yes for demonstrators, and no for voters. Now, I would have been surprised, say 5 or 10 years ago, of saying no for voters. But there's actually a bunch of recent work that also shows this finding. And in the end, I was surprised it was yes for anything, but the findings really show a strong, relatively, as much as you get in the social sciences, consistent and positive connection for protesters. And then we looked in the paper at, are there alternate explanations? Is it because of people's socioeconomic background, or is it because their political attitudes that actually explain the connection? And we do see some reduction in the strong connection between non-electoral participation and representation when these other things are taken into account, but there's still a positive connection there. So in terms of these days in Israel or in other places who are wondering, does protesting matter? Does raising your voice matter? This is some systematic long-term evidence that the answer is yes. And then it also raises those normative value questions that I noted at the beginning of, all right, well then people who are of higher means and are the ones who take the initiative and are out in the streets are able to translate their preferences better into policy, and what might be some of the normative implications for that for democratic governance. So that's it for the working paper. We'll wrap up here with invitations, and then we'll switch to Q&A. Upcoming events. So in the news, we try to, Aya has been Raya and Aya have been amazing partners in keeping everything updated with the website. You can see more information there, but I have a few upcoming more research-specific oriented talks. There's one at Tel Aviv next Monday. There's one at Hebrew U and Aaron Halperin's lab the week after that. Those of you who are interested by any of these papers, we're doing our best to present them in different places to be able to move them along. Second, upcoming events, this is completely due to the leadership of Gal Arieli. I wanted to make sure to mention it here in the faculty that we'll have hosted by BGU on February 12th, the Israel Political Science Association conference. At least some of the papers that I presented here, we submitted to the conference, and we'll hope to present there. So keep that in mind as another opportunity to engage with political science on campus. And a third broad invitation with the Young Academy group, with the Academia Tza'ira, that Iris and I have been working on and with for a while. We're working to support people who are both submitting to ERC, but also people who want to be developing PI team leadership skills and backgrounds and support, specifically in the humanities and social sciences. We think the natural sciences already get a lot of help in that direction. We're happy to partner with them, et cetera, but there are upcoming events on that as well. And then finally, to conclude with the webinar series, so those of you who are on the humanities and social sciences distribution list have probably seen a few of my emails on this from last year. And what happened with this series, this slide shows the speakers from public webinars last year that happened during the academic year. Here, I want to pause and acknowledge, I know some had to already go to class, but I see that Michal Katz is here. You raise your hand high. Who is one of the students in the webinar class. Is there anyone else I missed? Who? Amir, who was the one BA student who came to the talk and had to go to class, was one of the students. And what we did in that class, so I booked the speakers before October 7th, let me say that. And I booked them in a low stress kind of a way with an idea of like, oh, here are colleagues of mine who have been supportive. They've agreed to be on the expert network of the project. How can I connect them with the project? And I thought, oh, I'll just invite them on a Zoom to a class and they'll talk about their work a little bit. So that was like the motivating idea. And then it turned out that the dates changed a couple of times, but at the beginning, the first two in the semester that were planned after October 7th were Penn and Harvard, right after a lot of the political challenges during that period. And so I definitely entertained canceling the whole thing. But we went for it, and Michal was a huge chalutza in that first semester team group of trying to figure out how can we as a class that included, Michal's a PhD student, but it also included BA students, MA students, and then auditors from other universities. I'd sent out, to the broader academic listserv. So we had someone who's a postdoc at Haifa. We had someone who's an MA at Reichman, right, who came in to take part as well. And somehow we managed, very last minute last year, to come up with an approach for how to do a public webinar. We put out, a public link. We had I'd say about 30 people who joined each time from outside of the university, including people who had given talks in the series. So Theda Scotchwell, who I had mentioned before, gave one of the talks, and Michael Deli Carpini, who was one of our other talks from Penn, who's the dean of the communication, came because he wanted to hear what she had to say to our group. So there's a kind of community that built over the course of the semester and the year. I really had not planned to continue it after this year. It's a very public role that then also takes a lot of work. Wasn't so clear, at the beginning how much it really connected to ERC. But then people started to turn to me from other universities and say, oh, can we give a talk in your series? I was like, oh, okay, I guess I should, do it again. And I think part of what the speakers liked about it is that it's not a regular academic seminar where someone comes and then people give critique who are fellow academics. It's more the students read the papers really carefully, come up with I come up together with them questions about the work. The speaker talks for a half hour, and then we transition to students from the class, one after another, asking, the best question they can think of that, if I could ask a researcher this question, what would I ask them? And it sort of gives a different kind of a platform for the speakers and an opportunity for students to connect with them. We also, for those of you who aren't from politics and government, you're from other departments and considering recommending students, something that happened kind of organically that we didn't expect was that the speakers stayed. I asked them to stay for a few minutes towards the end to connect individually with students. And there's something about Zoom in that setting. Zoom is problematic in all kinds of ways, but there's something in that setting where these high-level speakers who are wonderful in a lot of ways were really generous in the stories that they told. Michal's nodding her head. Theda stayed and talked with us for a half hour about Israeli politics. There was a connection, I think, partly because then the Zoom is over and no one sort of follows you to the next meeting, that it enabled a kind of connection, and students really did follow up with the speakers in different ways. So the final two slides are a preview to this year. We have, in this first semester, actually a week from today, our first speaker. Her name is Anne Rasmussen. The paper that she's presenting it's in press right now at APSR, which is in political science, like one of the top journals, on the costs of running and engaging in politics, which I think we can all kind of identify with here. And she's also the PI of an ERC consolidator project that also deals with digital work. The speaker in January 8th, her name is Ruth Dassenville. She's been one of my long-term collaborators. She's at the University of Montreal, and she's going to talk about gender gap in voter turnout. She's also now an editor of one of the key journals in the discipline of BJPS, the British Journal of Political Science. And the final speaker this semester is Yotam Margalit. I wanted to, he'll be our first Israeli. I wanted to reach out to an Israeli who would talk about Israeli politics. And he had a recent paper out about democratic backsliding in Israel with other colleagues. And I really wanted him to present that paper, and he really did not want to. Or I don't know, really did not. He suggested this other topic. So, which is on the political consequences of green policies. And the students and I are really excited about that paper as well. So that's semester Aleph. That's public and on the website. And then finally, this isn't public and on the website yet, but just a preview to those who, among all of these colleagues reached out to ask if they could be in the series in semester bet. So Carolina Plesia, she's one who I mentioned is working collaboratively with Aya and I on this meetings of protest idea. And what she's going to present in June is her Oxford University Press book that's in process on the meanings of voting side of things. Researchers who are doing great work on representation, Shira Kurwakian and Steve Anselbeher, have a book project, and they'll present part of that. And then the final is Chris Blazian from the University of Texas, who has a great paper in progress on why democratic policy representation is really hard, meaning really hard to study as part of the work. So thank you very much, and looking forward to Q&A.
So I think that, first of all, thank you very much. That was a great example of how I think the personal and academic careers, the way people develop ideas, things, how you bring people together, how you think about ideas and translate that into academic, into publications and other things. And it was, I enjoyed the mix of the personal and the research itself. So I will open it up to for questions, but I would just, first of all, I'd like to know a lot more about that literature map and what it actually represents. And I'm sure there are other people here who want to do it as well, but also whether I answered on both questions, I got it wrong, okay, in your thing. But I just wondered, to start off the conversation, as to whether there's any difference between pre-social media and post-social media. In other words, social media is it social media that has what I intuitively thought would be the opposite, right? So actually created that difference that comes out in your research.
Would you like me to? Okay, great. And I also want to be mindful, to me, always the most important part is the mingling and the food. So by what time should we wrap up? By?
Quarter of an hour, 20 minutes.
Okay, great. Yeah. Do you want to call people, Chaim? No?
So thank you, it was fascinating. לגבי הממצא הראשון של ההצבעה, אז כאילו, אני חושבת שאמו גולדמן עוד אמרה לפני 100 שנה ש-if voting has changed anything, would have changed anything, it would be illegal. אז כאילו, נראה לי שזה פחות הפתיע אותי. אבל השאלה שלי לגבי כאילו הממצא של people who demonstrate have more kind of impact. זה משהו שאני תוהה לגבי כאילו הקשרים הפוליטיים שבהם נעשית מחאה והכיוונים הפוליטיים. לצורך העניין, בתור מישהי שכל חייה מפגינה נגד הכיבוש, אני לא מרגישה, זה פרסונל מאוד, אבל אני לא מרגישה שיש לזה איזשהו אימפקט. אבל להפוך את זה לשאלה, זאת אומרת, עד כמה האימפקט מושפע מהמרחק של כאילו המחאה ממשהו, הקול ההגמוני וכו'.
Thanks, Halili. Should we gather a few questions? Yeah.
That's our representation. אבל כשהצגת, אמרת opinion policy congruence. לא בטוח שזה אותו דבר. את ה-congruence זה התאמה בין שני נתונים. representation מניח איזשהו יחס סיבתי. ה-congruence יכולה להיות לא בגלל שיש באמת representation, אלא בגלל נסיבות אחרות. זאת אומרת, לא בטוח שזה אותו דבר.
It's reviewer 2 in person. Yeah. So I'll start with Dani and then I'll come back to Halili's question. So it's totally on target for this entire paper. We debated whether to embark on this data journey, right? Because it's a lot of work. Because we know with this kind of data setup, it's impossible to prove causality. Again, taking the setup that as if all of us here are answering a survey about our preferences, and then we have data 5 years from now about the policy outcome, there's no way, so that's important to know that relationship, but there's no way for us to eliminate any other causal factor. What motivated us to do the paper in any case, and here I will bring us a bit to the literature slide, is that political science kind of gave up on trying to answer this question at all in any direction, right? Because causality is clearly sort of the holy grail, and especially in this subfield of political behavior and representation. So people ask smaller questions or more specific questions that you can get clear causal answers about. And what we just decided that it was worthwhile in any case, knowing that this is a special set of data that does show policy implementation in the same context at a time lag of a certain amount. And what we wanted to see is there a connection at all, right? In order to clearly establish causality, we should at first see that there's a connection. We should at first see that there's a positive connection when you look just at a correlation between those variables. And so, we came back to here on the literature slide. They're famous political scientists, Verba and Nye in 1972. They wrote one of the last books that really tried to tackle this question head on, and they called it at the time this question of participation representation as perhaps the most important of all, and also perhaps the most difficult to answer, right? So agreed that we won't come here at the holy grail of causality, but we will be able to say whether there's a positive relationship, a negative relationship, or no relationship at all. And especially with the topic of demonstrating, there are two competing arguments in the literature. There's a communication argument that would say people who go out and protest are certainly, what's happening with their voices, they're transmitting it effectively, and they're going to be more represented. And that's been the presumption of American political scientists for sure, Verba, Schlasman, and Brady, a whole line of work that has been concerned about inequality and representation based on who's most politically active. And at the same time, that there's an opposite argument, a grievance argument that's more common among European researchers, that people who protest are those who are frustrated and upset, and they're likely to be out of step with government policy today and probably also 5 years from now, right? And so if the grievance argument were correct, we would find a negative association in the protesting. And so we felt that, this doesn't solve all questions mankind and womankind has about that connection, but it's a new piece of solid evidence that we haven't had till now. Our reviewer too. We'll have to, work on that argument. And Haleli, the question of, the way I wrote it down in my notes as you were talking in English was variation in left-right, like people on the left side of the spectrum and the right side of the spectrum in getting what they want. What we find in this, we didn't dig deep into it. It's not a central part of the paper, but we do find that there's, it's not as if the right wing get what they want and the left wing don't. It's that there's more variance among people who are protesting on the left and the right, and they both tend to, on their particular policy issues, be able to, on average, advance towards being better represented. And then coming back to Chaim, and then we can do another round, the question of what's happening with social media, is that, making it better or worse in different directions? So, I'll note that the title of the project, coming back to the beginning, participation and representation in the digital age. The digital age is a hook, right? It's something that is important. It raises questions. Is everything changing? I would say till now in the work that I've seen and that I've done, I don't believe that it's transforming patterns of participation and representation. I think there are interesting things to study about it. And I think that this work that I mentioned with Nir Greenberg, we're looking at Twitter data to take a look at political influencers. So people who, transmit a lot of content that relates to politics, sort of who are they? And perhaps more importantly, who's on the receiving end, who are the people who are paying attention to getting information from those channels. So I think, you know, a lot of that work is still in progress and showing that it can be kind of expediting some challenges of, particularly of equality of both participation and representation.
שאלות נוספות? טוב, אז קודם כל תודה רבה. כמובן שכולם וכולם מוזמנים ומוזמנות לאכול את כל האוכל בחוץ, את כל האוכל, כן? כדי שהוא לא ייזרק, וזה גם הזדמנות לפגוש, להגיד שלום למי שאתם לא מכירים, כן? ולשמוע מי הם ומה הם עושים, וכמובן נמשיך לדבר עם ג'ני, אז תודה לכולם.
תודה. כן, כן. שנייה, אני פשוט אסגור את זה, שזה יפסיק להקליט.